Hi cookie lovers, my name is Tom and I'm a cookie addict. In this episode we're going to talk about oatmeal cookies. Oatmeal cookies are second only to chocolate chip in terms of popularity in America, and almost every family has a favorite oatmeal cookie recipe. The recipe we're going to try in this episode is a crunchy version. There are soft and chewy versions as well, but this one will be crunchy and it will have raisins in it. You can leave the raisins out if you don't particularly like them. As usual, our first step is to assemble all the ingredients. So here are the ingredients we need. First, 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar, 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar, 1/2 cup of unsalted butter, which is 1 stick, 1/2 cup of vegetable shortening, which fortunately comes in stick form nowadays, and that would be 1/2 stick, a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of baking powder, and then our spices, which give the cookies that wonderful aroma and flavor. First, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, 1/8 teaspoon of ground cloves, and for added flavor, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Then we need 1 egg, carefully protected here in a shot glass, 3 cups of oats, essential of course in oatmeal cookies, and we're using the quick cook kind, which are chopped up finer than the regular oatmeal, and it makes the cookie have a little finer texture. Then we need 1 cup of all-purpose flour and 1 cup of raisins, which are of course optional. So now we're ready to mix all these ingredients together, but before we do that we need to make sure that we've prepared a couple of things so we'll have something to do with the batter when it's ready. First, we need to heat the oven to 325 degrees and allow plenty of time to do that. It usually takes 10 to 15 minutes. These cookies bake at a somewhat lower temperature, but they bake for a longer time to make sure that they come out crispy. The other thing to do is to prepare a couple of cookie sheets by cutting parchment to fit on them. The parchment will keep the cookies from sticking. You can simply grease the cookie sheet if you want, but the parchment is great because you can reuse it for a second batch. Well, now that we have the oven and the cookie sheets ready, the next step is to mix up all the ingredients to form the dough. You can do that by hand, and it will strengthen your wrists, believe me. I happen to have one of these KitchenAid mixers, and if you have one as well, you can use it to put the ingredients together, and it has to go in a certain order. First, we're going to put the flat blade mixer blade onto this machine, like that, and then we're going to add the butter and the shortening, and the 2 kinds of sugar, the brown sugar and the granulated sugar, and cream them together. Then we'll add in a lot of the dry ingredients, like the spices and so on. So let's put in the shortening, the butter, and the vegetable shortening, and we'll pull this down and lock it into place and start the machine on a speed of about 1, just for a low speed mixing. And as it gets going, we can kind of, well, we can put in the white sugar first. Just add that a little bit at a time. And then normally I would use a spoon, but since I don't have one here, we'll add in the brown sugar. Oops, that all goes. Very good. Now this thing is blending that all together, and as it does that, it whips some air into the mixture. We do need to stop this once in a while and scrape down the edge of the bowl so that everything gets blended together. So I'm going to stop it right now, and then we'll start it and add the dry ingredients. So we have the shortening and the sugars creamed pretty well. And so now the next step will be to add the dry ingredients. A teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of baking powder. Isn't it nice that they put that little leveling edge on the can so that you can level off your measuring spoon when you get it full? Okay, there's our baking powder. A half a teaspoon of cinnamon. And since we don't want to sprinkle it, we'll take that little sprinkly lid off of there. And these measuring spoons are great. They're designed so that they have a narrow end that will go down into jars like this. And we'll get about a half a teaspoon of cinnamon here and sprinkle that around in there. We need 1/4 of a teaspoon of nutmeg, which also has a little sprinkly thing, but we'll take that out. I think you can tell why these cookies are going to be so tasty is because they have so many seasonings in them. Really comfort flavors. And then 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground cloves. And sometimes it's hard to find a 1/8 of a teaspoon measure, so when I found one in a shop a while back, I got a hold of it, and I don't let anybody borrow it. So there are our dry ingredients. Now we can turn on the mixer again for a little bit and get all those things blended in. And it's good to stop after, 20-30 seconds and lift the beater up. You can see a lot of that stuff sticks to it. And scrape down the side of the bowl, because some of the ingredients are going to be on the side of the bowl and they won't get mixed in properly unless we do this once in a while. And we'll try to get all this stuff off of that and a scraper, and then we'll lock this down and do it again for 30 seconds or so. Alright, we got all these dry ingredients put in. I'm going to get them out of the way. In a moment I'll be back and we'll put in the final ingredients, which include the egg, the oats, the flour, and the raisins, and then we'll have dough that's ready to go. Okay, now we're ready to add the final set of ingredients. And I'll tip this up so we can get things in there easily. First, we need an egg. Hope that hit the sink. We need 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And then I'm going to start the mixer running on its lowest speed so we can add the oats, the all-purpose flour, and the raisins gradually. Okay, 3 cups of oats. Gotta have them or you don't have oatmeal cookies. And we'll just add those in kind of slowly so the machine has a chance to mix them in. Now remember, you can do all this by hand. And it's not that difficult really, but since I had the mixer here, I enjoy playing with gadgets, just thought I'd use it. There, the oats are in there. The dough is now getting pretty thick. We're going to add flour. Full cup of flour. Let that blend in there for a little bit. Good. Now we'll stop the mixer, and I think it would be best to add the raisins by hand. So we'll do that in just a moment. Now we have everything in the dough except the raisins. So I'll remove this flat beater and set it aside. And take the cup of raisins and start dropping them in. And we can just mix those in by hand. This is a really nice silicone flat bladed scraper, and it's great for making omelets, and it's also great for mixing things, kind of folding things into dough. And we just add these a bit at a time so that we can get them evenly distributed through the dough. Well, now that the dough is all mixed up, I've taken it out, put it on a plate, and we're ready to bake 2 test cookies. It's a really great idea to take the baking sheet, put a little piece of parchment on it if that's the way you choose to do it, and bake 2 cookies. Let them cool and test them. That way you don't waste a whole batch of dough cooking cookies too long or not long enough. 2 test cookies will tell you exactly what your baking time should be, and you'll see that everything is going right. Then you can bake a couple of full sheets of cookies. So what we'll do is take about a tablespoon of this cookie dough and kind of loosely form it into a ball, and then press it down to a 1/4 inch thick. And to do that, one way you can do it is to put a little piece of paper towel around the bottom of a drinking glass, dampen the towel, and then you can press down on the cookie dough till it's about a 1/4 inch thick, and the dough won't stick to the glass. So let's do another one of those, and then we'll put them in the oven and see what happens. These cookies need to bake about 20 minutes to develop the appropriate crispness that we're looking for. I want to make sure I get them thin enough, because otherwise they won't bake fully in that 20-minute time period. Okay, these are ready to go in the oven, and I'll put them in there in 20 minutes. We'll take them out, let them cool for 2 or 3 minutes on the cookie sheet, then let them cool for a little while on a rack, and then we can test them and see if they've baked up the way we want them to. So here we go. We're going to set the timer for 20 minutes. The oven is preheated, and we'll just slide the cookies in about on the middle rack, and we'll wait to see what happens. Okay, so our timer is about ready to go off. Let's wait for that to happen, and then we'll pull these cookies out of the oven, our test batch, and see how they look. Looking pretty good. I think we might want to give them a couple more minutes to just brown up on the top a little bit. So we'll set the, let's say 2 minutes and 30 seconds. We'll set the timer for that. And when that goes off, we'll come back and have another look. Well, our timer is about ready to go off again after another 2.5 minutes. There it goes. So we'll pull these cookies out of here and see what they look like. I think they're perfect. Whoop! Well, cookie accidents do happen. However, we have one good test cookie that we can look at. Well, cookie connoisseurs, here's our one surviving test cookie, and let's see how it came out. It's nicely browned all around, not too dark on the bottom, and I can tell by the wet parts that it's pretty crunchy, perhaps a little chewy, but it looks just right. It's baked all the way through. So now we're ready to do a production run. So now we've learned a couple of things. One is that 22 minutes is about the right baking time for this batch of cookies. And the other is that parchment on cookie sheets can be very slippery. So this time we're going to put the cookies on the sheet, press them down with the glass, And then be very careful when we put them in the oven, and when we take them out, so that none of them go on the floor. Let's get started. We take a small amount of cookie dough. I like to roll it together in the hands. Put it on the cookie sheet. Press it down to the glass, with the glass, to about a 1/4 inch thickness. And if we do that pretty uniformly, all the cookies will bake at the same rate. We need to get about the same thickness on each piece of dough. We don't want to crowd them too much on the cookie sheet. However, these cookies do not spread out very much, so you don't need to be too concerned about putting them too close. Once we get this whole sheet filled, we're going to pop it in the oven, cook it 22 minutes, bake it 22 minutes, pull it out, let it cool on the sheet for about 4 or 5 minutes, and then transfer the cookies to the cooling rack for another 4 or 5 minutes, and then they're done. Meanwhile, we can be putting another sheet of cookies into the oven so we can kind of bake in rotation. And we should wind up with about 4 dozen cookies. So there you go, folks. A plate full of delightful, crunchy, tasty, healthful oatmeal raisin cookies. Make yourself a batch, and don't forget to take some to your grandma.